If you've enjoyed my conversations with George Barna as much as I have, well then we're happy campers. It's just terrific having George here in the studio. Most of us have read of him or read his work. We've been impacted by his research, directly, indirectly. He's just a household name out there and has come our way for these 3 days with this book, Futurecast, What Today's Trends Mean for Tomorrow's World. It's a terrific book that is full of information. The last couple of days we've talked a little bit about it. George, I want to pick up on something, if I can find it here. I read these books and then I sort of have this memory of where they are. Oh yes, here it is. You talk about antidotes to poverty because of the impact that poverty is having generally in North American culture. And you say that a key and critical factor here is to increase the percentage of stable marriages. Now, that made me think of a conversation I had with one of Canada's former prime ministers, Paul Martin. And I asked him one day in a meeting with him, what is the number one cost driver in Canada today? And without taking a breath, he said, the breakdown of the family. He then demonstrated, from his role as head of state, how the breakdown of the family has a domino effect in the culture, and every one of those domino effects has a price. And we're talking billions of dollars, everything from care for disadvantaged families to prison expenses, to, you name it. What I was astonished at as I was reading your book is that there's very, very little statistical variance between the unchurched world and the church world as it relates to family dysfunction. Talk to me a little bit about that.
You know, it's been interesting to see. We have a lot of sermons that are given about the importance of marriage, the importance of family and whatnot. And people understand that. The difficulty is when real life hits, there are tough situations. People don't know how to deal with conflict. And so you've got a lot of marriages that are torn apart by conflict within the relationship. Neither party knows how to handle it. They just do what comes naturally, which typically undermines that relationship. You look at the amount of abuse and violence within homes. You look at what happens with children, which is really frightening. You look at, even some of the research that we've done related to how people become the people they ultimately are. Between the ages of 5 and 12, you essentially become who you're going to be for the rest of your life. So if you're growing up during those key formative years, those 8 years or so, in a dysfunctional environment, in a anger-ridden, hostile environment, that's what you're going to assume life is all about. And so you then take that into the next 70 years or so of your life, and that's how you interact with people. So you've got the breakdown of relationships. I'm fascinated by what's going on with technology and what we now call relationships, which is somebody sending out a sentence or two through text or through some of the other technological means. I'm not against it. I'm just fearful that that's becoming the core of what we consider to be commitment and relationship. And so it's not surprising that now with young people in our countries, they want to get married. More than 80% of them who are not yet married say they want to get married, and they want their marriage to last for the long haul, but they don't expect it to. Right. And then that in itself becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they don't go into it with a total commitment because there's a part of themselves that's trying to protect themselves from what they believe is ultimately inescapable. It's going to happen. It's going to dissolve.
Well, about half of them now are being raised in homes that have experienced divorce, right?
Yeah. So it's a real difficult problem, but we've got to rethink, okay, so what is the role of community? When we talk about the church being a community, I think we have this idea that we're the community when we all come, we sit down and we look at the back of somebody's head while we listen to somebody talk at us for 35 minutes. Well, that's not community. That's an audience. That's an event. Community is where you've got a real relationship. There's accountability, there's trust, there's vulnerability, there's sharing, there's sacrificing for the good of the other. All of these kinds of things that get put into that interaction. And I don't see that happening to nearly the extent that I think we need it to. If people aren't going to have that kind of commitment and accountability and trust within the church, where are they going to get it? I'm okay with them getting it someplace else, but I don't see it happening anyplace else either. So I think this is an era where the church, the Christian church, has an incredible opportunity to reshape the future of culture through what it does with families. But it's got to be done through more than just by having an expert come in and teach for an hour on what makes a good marriage.
You mentioned in the book that it came almost as a revelation to you, a sort of an epiphany. That
which one?
Well, the one I'm talking about is the key to really impacting the world is not through a mass movement or even mass media, but just one at a time, one by one. It took you a while to get to that point.
You know, Jim, I started out in the political world. I used to manage political campaigns, and I spent some years doing surveys for campaigns and working for government, doing policy surveys and whatnot. And the perspective there, of course, is always that you make the big pronouncement, or you have the one policy that changes everything, and we're so much better off for it. And of course, that generally doesn't work. But I came into the ministry world with that kind of a mindset. And so for years and years, I was trying to figure out, boy, how can we have, you know, the great sermon series, or the great program, or the great this, the great that, that will change everything. It will cause this big mass movement, this revolution of faith. And, you know, at one point I was reading through Scripture and realized, Jesus never did that. The early church wasn't like that. Oh gosh, I missed the boat. And then I kind of went back and started looking at the data that we had from people's lives who had been changed and what had stimulated that kind of change, and realized it was always on the basis of one other person who'd invested in them for a prolonged period of time, and then a real significant change happened. And it finally dawned on me, you know what? Revolutions happen one life at a time. And that's really what I have to be investing in, is helping individuals realize you haven't been called to change the world in one fell swoop. You've been called to change the world one life at a time. And if you can do that and do it consistently over the course of your life, you've lived a great life.
You know, I've often said from my work in Africa that all of the great ministries that I have been introduced to there, every one of them, George, began with one person ministering to one person. And one became two, and two became four, and four became eight, exponential growth. But that DNA element of one-to-one was part and parcel of its success. The importance of that one-to-one relationship. And you talk about Jesus. I mean, if we look at him, you know, through the metrics that are out there, we would say he was a failure. I mean, here you have the Son of God, and he only really influenced significantly 12 guys, and one of them betrayed him.
Right.
You know, and the key guy became the rock, denied him 3 times. I mean, really, and yet that's how he changed the world.
Yeah.
With his little congregation of 12 guys.
Yeah. Yeah.